still EconoChat Let's Talk Business with Mr. Daniel Steinman on your Power Station Energy 100. We are talking about the mid-year budget review as the minister is tabling the budget. But of course, let's quickly touch on GDP. We're touching on revenue and also deficit, Mr. Daniel Steinman. With time not on our side, I am sure that you will be able to squeeze all that in.
Okay, what I want to do is make a comparison.
Okay.
And the big question is, did we actually make the 200 billion mark last year? And now I have to, you remember what I said earlier, that scratching around in the national accounts is no longer just looking at four pieces or four A4 prints. It's really complicated. You know, and you don't just do it in 5 minutes. And you also have to understand the methodology, because the methodology is all part of this IMF, MTEF, medium-term expenditure framework, all part of the whole budget apparatus. And you have to understand that to know what you're looking at, because there are thousands, not thousands, I'm exaggerating, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of spreadsheets with data sets in raw data sets. You know, so if you don't have the not the capacity, if you don't have the tools, the mind tools to look at those, it is just grey pieces of paper. You know, those figures, they swim in front of your eyes. So yes, we actually made the 200 billion mark in GDP in 2022-2023. Remember the period that came to an end on the 31st of March this year. If we look at this year, 23-24, it looks like, remember the figure that we were given on the 22nd of February this year in the main budget was 216 billion GDP. And I made a very broad calculation based on the first two quarters, fiscal quarters, and I think we're going to come to a GDP of about 232 billion. It means that the total economy will be bigger by about 17 billion Namibia dollar than what we projected 6 months ago. Now that must certainly make the Minister of Finance a very happy man. Now I think he can sleep well. Because if your GDP is so significantly higher, all the other figures are affected. And the next very important one is the question that you always ask: what is the deficit? Now remember, the deficit, with the provisions that we had to make for COVID in 2020 and 2021, we came from a scenario where the deficit was, for 3 years running, more than 10% of expenditure every year. And it's very important that you make a clear distinction when we make these comparisons. Do we measure it against GDP? In other words, do we measure it against the entire economy, or do we measure it against the revenue, the government's income side, or the expenditure side? It's a bit technical, and I don't think it's that important for the average listener. It's just, I think it's important that one needs to know that there are various measurements, and we apply, we call them ratios, and we apply them in the mid-year budget review, a lot of them, so that when you make a ratio, when you measure a ratio in 1 6-month period, it is a bit meaningless. But if you do it for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 years, you start seeing a trend. Then it becomes very valuable, because you can see we're going up or we're going down, high road, low road. And we are, remember, the troubles we had started in 2016, when everybody said I was talking nonsense. And it is only, and then came COVID. So we were hit twice in the face, bum, 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 you know. And it was only last year that you started seeing a pivotal point, it started turning. But remember what I've explained in the past, when you come from a very low base, it's easy to make, statistically, to make the economic performance look very good. Then you can say, we've grown 4.6%, but you keep quiet that we don't remember, we like to forget that we got smaller by 8.1% the year before that, So I think we have finally overcome the base effect. That you have these distortions in your growth figures that originate from the recession.
Yeah.
So now we are on a trajectory where at least we can plan for the normal development of an economy under normal conditions. And I'm sure that the lessons that we learned with the very overstimulated economy that we had in 2013, 14, 15, I don't think we will repeat that. Despite the fact that the GDP will be substantially more than what was projected, the budget deficit will still come in at around 4.2% of expenditure.
Okay.
It will be just over 10 billion. The bad thing is, if you look at the split in the government's expenses, is that about 10% of expenditure goes to investment in projects, infrastructure spending. So it's the type of thing that you need to grow the economy.
Yeah.
And about 12% of expenditure goes into interest serving. The interest we have to pay on our debt, the government debt. And that government debt is probably still going to exceed 70% at the end of this current fiscal year. It's very unlikely that it will not reach 70%, but that is where I see it turn. And that's also the stated policy of the Ministry of Finance, that when we get to the end of 2023, we want to be in control of the budget deficit.
Okay.
That thing that I said earlier, if the budget deficit is bigger, the debt grows faster. If the budget deficit comes down, the debt grows slower. So, at the same time, the economy grows. So the ratio, there's that magic word again, comes down, gets smaller. And this is what we want. We don't want to get rid of the deficit overnight, or in one fiscal year, or even in 3 fiscal years. We want to make it manageable. And for it to be manageable, you're looking at repeat deficits of not more than about 3.6% of expenditure.
Okay.
Yeah. Now you can imagine there's a big difference between 3.6% and 10% and 11% that we had. So a very good sign, and I'm sure the minister will use the leeway that the growth in the economy is giving him. He will use it to fine-tune those ratios and to state certain definite targets in the sense that, look, it all depends on what's going to happen with the oil discoveries, or a lot will depend on it. But that we get to a point, let's say about 5 years from now, where we can actually have the luxury of budgeting for a surplus. Meaning, after we've paid everybody, there's a little bit left to put in the piggy bank.
For each Namibian ticket.
Yes.
And on that note, we unfortunately have to say goodbye to you. Thank you so much, Mr. Daniel Steinman, for of course, educating us once again. And also thank you to the loyal listeners. You can, of course, have your questions and send it to elsaB@energy100fm.com. If you want us to talk about certain topics, you can also give your input, or even give us a review if you want to. And on that note, from me, Elsa B. Timinyani, I say goodbye to you until next time.